Hi there. I just wanted to make a quick video about political correctness. I've been meaning to do this for a long time and I haven't had the chance or the time. Um, but let me just get some notes up here. Yeah, the issue that bothers me a lot these days. Well, there are a few issues, but political correctness is one of them. I get into a lot of arguments because basically most people seem to assume that political correctness is a good thing. Even that the intentions are good, even if some of the methods or some of the people who advocate it are questionable. Still, broadly speaking, political correctness is surely looking out for minorities, looking out for the underdog. So therefore, it's fine, right? And I just don't think so. I don't think that that's true. And one of the things that bothers me about it is the fact that I actually do care about a lot of those supposed goals. I do care about the most vulnerable in society. In fact, I do, and I do agree with a lot of people on the left. For instance, Jeremy Corbyn, who say that we measure the quality and the moral worth of our society by how we treat the people who are most vulnerable, and I know that to be the case. I don't just think it, I know that to be the case. I think that's right, and I think that's something that the left wing should be proud of. But I just don't think that the best way to do it is to adopt political correctness, to adopt prescriptive rules on what should and shouldn't be said, and what should and shouldn't be thought. That they're sort of like, I think the thing about political correctness is that it's authoritarian, but it's also, what do they call it in America? Prior restraint. It's a kind of, it's prescriptive before the fact. It's saying this sort of list of things is okay and this list of things is not okay, and we sort of parse out the moral worth of whatever event it is into those lists. I think that's fatuous. I also think it's really stupid. Fatuous and stupid are the same thing, but I think that it's absurd and stupid is what I'm trying to say. So it's not just ridiculous and kind of farcical, but it's also, it requires no cognitive power to come up with that. And if you look at much of what passes for opinion in the Huffington Post or the Guardian, or even just most of the stuff on Twitter, whatever event it is, whether it's a terrorist attack or anything, sex scandals, harassment scandals, whatever's been going on, Donald Trump, it's always this sort of method of, he's not fitting into this list, he's doing this list, therefore X. I think this is like a ridiculous way. And people would say, well, why are you so annoyed about this? This is just like what happens in opinion blogs. It's not the real world. Political correctness is still something that, broadly speaking, we want to treat people with dignity. Yes, but I don't think that you cannot prescribe dignity. That's my fundamental point. I'm anti-authoritarian, but it's not just anti-authoritarian because I don't like being told what to do, man. It's like, I just think that actually what makes for a proper citizen is autonomy. The whole idea is that of citizenship is that you enhance the quality of an individual's autonomy so that the moral value of their actions is deepened and made more rich when they do it for themselves. I think it was Aristotle who said that someone who decides not to commit a crime simply because they're scared of punishment is not being moral. And I think that that's kind of my point when it comes to political correctness, is that yes, I believe in human dignity. Yes, I believe in taking care of the most vulnerable very passionately, but I don't believe that prescriptive rules are going to make that happen. It might have some short-term benefits, but even that's a bit random, because you're still dependent on whether or not people are going to follow those rules or not. Far better, and I think this is really the message of the great leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, far better to transform people's perceptions, transform people's spiritual circumstance, if you like. And therefore, and you might think that that kind of argument is kind of pie in the sky or abstract or philosophical, but I think it's the only way to go. I don't think you can prescribe morality into society. You have to deepen the conscience of human beings for them, and this applies to all of us, for us to be truly moral. And I think that that's the that's the driving thrust of it. But I basically don't think political correctness is progressive. That's my main beef with it. I don't actually think it does what people claim it to be doing. I actually think it has the opposite effect. If you look at the rise of the alt-right, supposed alt-right, whatever it is, I mean, a lot of people get branded alt-right just because they don't believe in this stuff. Some people have not accused me of being alt-right, but kind of questioned and cast aspersions on my character and sort of probed me, like, oh, well, what do you really think? Is there something going on? No, I just believe in that the most progressive solution to most problems in society, when it comes on a social political level, is actually a spiritual question. That's what I believe, and therefore you need a kind of classical liberal context for the individual's spiritual integrity to flourish. That's basically, in a nutshell, my worldview. You cannot, and I think that's a result that comes from the great teachings of all the religions. That I think that's the great teaching of Jesus, is that you can follow all these prescribed rules and wash your hands and after meal or before meal, whatever it is that he talks about, or go to temple on the Sabbath or whatever prescribed rules it is. But that doesn't make you holy, and that's where I'm coming from. It's what's in your heart, and that's the truly progressive thing. And I think one of the upshots of political correctness is it makes being nasty, rebellious, and cool. So whatever is prescribed, whatever is the sort of dominant prescriptive consensus, will always incite sort of rebellion, underground movement. And now what's happened is, by political correctness being so turgid and clumsy and being so dominant, it's made being nasty and cruel and nihilistic something that's very cool and hip. And that's the big explanation for the rise of people like Milo Yiannopoulos, or that kind of young, punky, alt-right movement is a result of political correctness, because it's basically saying, don't tell me how to live my life. If I want to be a cruel bastard, I will. And they kind of have a point to it, to a very limited extent. There is a point in the sense that you cannot make me moral by telling me what to do. I can see why that's where it gets its moral power, the alt-right. If people were stopped being so prescriptive and finger-pointy, and that stopped becoming such the dominant consensus of the day, then you would take a lot of the sting out of the alt-right, and they would kind of disappear, because it's the substance of what they believe is kind of vacuous and changes all the time. A bit like Donald Trump. You would take a lot of his leverage away if we got rid of political correctness. I also think that political correctness allows I think that my explanation for the rise of political correctness is the rise of marketing culture as the dominant values of the day, consumer marketing culture, and this really began to be clear to me when Tony Blair came to power in the late 90s, and it was apparent, and it was I suppose a response to Bill Clinton. So maybe Bill Clinton was really the one who crystallized it in contemporary culture. But it was this idea of selling ideas to the people. So it didn't really matter about the substance, it was how you sold them, it was the rhetoric that you used. So if you just, that it then became a kind of science or an industry, and it has done, and we live in that world now, and we're living with the consequences of it. Whereby you can sell any idea to the people, as long as you use certain techniques and certain propaganda techniques. Of course, none of this is new, but the what is new is the political correct aspect to it. The idea that you're not just giving the people what they want or manipulating them or using rhetoric. What you're actually, you can make anything look like it's, if you use the language of diversity and moral dignity, people will automatically start to think it must be a good thing, and anything that opposes it is a bad thing. And I think that one of the most illustrative ways in recent months that this kind of takes its course was with Harvey Weinstein and his statements after he was basically found out for being a horrible, fucking tyrannical rapist and harasser and abuser. His whole strategy was to get on top of the news cycle and make a statement saying, you know, about I need to go to sex therapy and I need to do this, and sort of I recognise I'm wrong, but I hope I can be given a second chance. Yeah. I think that if you look at his whole language, it was couched in the rhetoric of political correctness, and the guy himself was very politically correct. You know, he was, you know, there's pictures of him in the Pussy March after Donald Trump was elected, and you know, with his silly pink pussy hat, you know, and all his female stars, and all these women who have been supposedly supporting equal pay in Hollywood, like Meryl Streep, loving him and you know, singing his praises before he got found out. I think that you can look at a lot of the falseness of all that as a result of political correctness, because political correctness as long as you sort of focus in on certain talking points, as long as you tick certain boxes, you're on the right side. So and it has absolutely nothing to do with the core moral worth of who you are. So a lot of it is about bluster and saying certain, you know, saying I believe in this, I believe in that, you know, therefore, you know, or a lot of it actually is, and this is very apparent on social media, is it's about what you don't like illustrates who you are and how cool and hip and right on you are, politically correctly speaking. So if you know, you hate racism, yeah, you must be like, you know, automatically, if you just say that you hate racism, then suddenly I must think that you're, you know, a saint. Well, that's not how morality works, and it's not actually how anti-fascism should work or anti-racism should work. You know, it's a very superficial and unthinking. It's unthinking because it's about automatic responses rather than considered deep what's the word I'm looking for? Conscience exploring level work. That's when the real moral stuff happens, and that can only happen actually on an individual level. So I will just say that actually, that the only way, because I believe that, and I think, you know, I'm not alone on that, you know, I think most of the major religions have this kind of teaching at the core of them, and most of the great political leaders have that teaching eventually at the core of what they're saying, that because you can only change people one individual at a time, and that moral conscience is the basis of social morality. Therefore, that's why I think the individual is the most important minority, and that's why I'm a classical liberal. That's why. So if anybody wants to argue with me the point about individuality and liberalism, you have to understand that point and you have to question that point, but know that you're up against most religions, you're up against most of the great political philosophers, and you're up against most activists. Anyway, so yeah, that's I think that political correctness is, because it's so prescriptive and because it's so much based on what you do or don't say, it's just really a kind of marketing. It's like and very often negative marketing. So if you condemn certain things on the bad list, then that must mean that you're automatically on the good list, and that's what people like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Clinton or Tony Blair, that's how these people maintain their power. It allows them to never actually expose the true underbelly of who they are, but they can always just apply tick box ways of virtue signaling. Yeah, and another thing about political correctness is that it seems, I'm not sure how this has happened, but it seems to now create a culture of shame whereby you're guilty until proven innocent. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's so obsessed with words and obsessed with what you do or don't say. And it has this, and I think people must find it convenient to have this automatic list sorting. It's a kind of spreadsheet mentality where it's like if you're in the good column, if you're in the bad column, you know, you must think this, this, and this, or if you think this and this and this, you're in the good column, and if you think this, this, and this, and this, you're in the bad column. So what people like about that and what's attractive about that is it's an easy way of sorting out difficult moral questions. But ultimately, underneath all of that, it's a new form of ideological thinking. It's not communist, it's not fascist, it's not religious, but it kind of is all of those things. It's just a new, subtle, consumerist, corporate version of that, where, you know, and I think you could look at the formula of pretty much every single opinion piece you'll read today on Facebook will have this kind of moral structure to it, whereas, you know, this person said this, this, and this, therefore they're in that column, or this person said this, 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 and therefore they're in that column, or they failed to say this, this, and this, and this, so they must be in that column. If they don't say this, this, and this, or they fail to condemn this or this, it's an easy and attractive and simple way of sorting out difficult moral questions. But what it does is it creates a culture of shame. You're guilty until proven innocence. And what happens is in social media is that the consensus based around this simple structure of moral sorting ends up behaving like the worst aspects of the medieval church. It's like the Inquisition. So or it's like Maoism. You're not only expected to agree with certain tick box issues. You've got to explicitly condemn things. Otherwise, we will assume the worst about you. And so I wonder what's beneath this. I wonder what the conception of human nature is in this way of looking at the world. And this is a problem with all ideological thinking. To me, that the central question is, what's the conception of human nature that's operating at the base of this worldview? It must be a very limited and impoverished view of human conscience or human potential that feels that the best way to defend human dignity, the best way to defend the underdog or the most vulnerable in society is this kind of simple good column, bad column, tick box way of looking at the world. I think that it shows that not only do those people have a view of other people, which is very negative and very limited and very suspicious, a kind of fear of others, that they would have to sort of enforce and impose a top-down prior restraint kind of mentality onto the world, but also it's like, what kind of view of themselves do they have? What kind of self-image do they have about their own moral conscience and about their own, do they have a rich, imaginative, complex relationship with themselves? Probably not. They treat themselves, it's like we treat our souls like they're rabid dogs that have to be tamed. It's like that's not the relationship we should have with our own selves. And that I think that the history of religion and the history of ideological contest proves that. It shouldn't need to be said, but I think that we're blinded to the fact that we're living in highly ideological times by the kind of consumerist luxury in which we live, and by the kind of Twitter bombardment and noise, but really at the bottom of it is a very simplistic, ideological, unimaginative, that's the main word here, unimaginative way of looking at the world. I mean, I think that one of the problems here is that we need something stronger than just a set of rules on paper. When part of the problem is the loss of God, part of the problem is a loss of spirituality, or just a loss of a sense of the transcendent, because that means that local issues of what's right or wrong are subordinate to a kind of higher ideal in society. So it's not a question of whether, say for whether eating meat is bad or good, right? That cannot be sorted out through political correct methodology. You cannot look at the good column and the bad column and think there are arguments on both sides. So that with a truly spiritual way of looking at the world, you would sort of say, well, what's the transcendent value that we're trying to achieve here? What's the and it's non-utilitarian. We're not talking about what's the usefulness or what's the gain to be had. It's what is the ultimate virtue and value that we esteem the highest, and will my personal restraint in regards to eating meat and dairy products take me towards that ideal? And there might be contexts in which one person has to do it and one person must not do it in order to achieve that same ideal. That same transcendent ideal can be served by opposing lifestyles. And then that's the kind of complex reality of ethics which I'm trying to argue for, and which I think political correctness is the enemy of. I did have something else I wanted to say about it. I mean, it's not really it's just a sort of illustrative point. Someone texted me yesterday a t-shirt in a shop window with gender written over it. And I thought, that's annoying because it's the consensus. It's annoying because someone's telling me what to think effectively, that there's a sort of value system embedded in advertising speech that I can't do anything about. It's imposing itself upon me. And those things are aspects of what annoy me about political correctness. But what really annoys me about it is that, if we're talking about, say, trans rights or feminism or any of these gender issues, do we really think that reducing it to fashion statements is the way forward? And I think that the fact that it is reduced to fashion statements, and this is frankly what happens, is that people might argue that today we live in social media is perfect because more people are debating, more disagreements happening, blah, blah, blah. So actually it's a good thing. Some people might take that point of view, but I don't think that the consumer technological world that we live in is really conducive to ideas. Wearing a t-shirt which says gender on it is not going to make me more aware about someone who's trans, or a woman who's suffered domestic abuse. And in fact, it's an insult to people's real struggles to reduce things to a fashion statement. And I think that's ultimately, that there's just something about that which was illustrative to me about the real nature of political correctness, is that it's really just a fashion statement. And that's what I want to say. Okay, thanks for listening.